All right, everyone hear me okay? All right, a little bit of a Senate conference hearing setup here. Sorry about the press conference, but good morning, or maybe even good afternoon or good evening if you're watching this later on through the streaming service. But my name is Dave Minji. I'm a Senior Vice President with Team USA in Los Angeles 2028. Super proud to be here today. Another great day at South by. We'll be talking about the intersection of tech and sport with some incredibly distinguished guests. Innovators that will illuminate how we're transforming every aspect of sport, of the Olympic and Paralympic movement, from sport performance on the field of play to simply how we engage the next great generation of fans in our sport, wherever and however they consume our product around the world. But hey, I get it. I just want to note that as I sit here, some of you might be saying, really, are you guys really that busy 5 years away? And a lot of times I'll get questions from friends and family and peers in the industry that say, wait, 2028, that's still a long way away. How can you guys be that busy? And it's really not only until I put some of the context into our journey that it starts to make sense for the folks that ask the question. And so just when you think about it, even though we're 5 years away, what we're trying to pull off in the summer of 2028 for Los Angeles is essentially the equivalent of hosting 7 Super Bowls a day for 17 days in a row. So when you think about that, it's quite a complex underpinning. By comparison, we think of it as the world's largest peaceful gathering. And as we think about rolling in just 2 weeks after the conclusion of the Olympic Games, of course, we'll do something roughly to the same scale with the Paralympic Games that now has risen to be among the top 5 largest sporting events in the world, certainly taking its rightful place with the World Track and Field Championships, FIFA World Cup, and other types of events. The summer of 2028 will see us host more than 15,000 athletes from more than 200 nations, competing for thousands of medals in front of millions of fans and being consumed through the broadcast worldwide by billions, from the tiniest remote villages in the world to some of our most congested cities. We will be looking, as I said, to host the largest peaceful gathering, right? So let that sink in for a sec, particularly in the day and age that we live in. We think about the troubled times that we're in, and whether it's geopolitically or environmentally, socially, how important it is to remind the world that truly we're much better when we come together than we force ourselves to drift apart. So beyond the playing of sport is really the impact of sport and what we can do. This morning's conversation will be a behind the curtain peek at how Salesforce, particularly one of the most dynamic companies in the world, is helping us advance the games with technology, innovation, and analytics. And leading this work to co-create the transformation of the Olympic and Paralympic movement with us is the President and CMO of Salesforce. She'll be joined by 2 incredibly impressive Team USA athletes, one that is still actively competing, and dare I say dominating, and another who is arguably the greatest to have ever worn the Team USA uniform in the Winter Games. I'll note as we get through today's session that our panelists have very kindly agreed to take questions from the audience, so I'll get through a few up here and then certainly invite you guys to come up to the microphone and ask some questions that you may have on your own. So with that, I'd like to get into some introductions. It's my great pleasure to welcome a very important partner to Team USA and the LA28 Games. She is widely regarded as a trailblazer in tech and sits as one of the most highly respected global leaders in innovation. As President and CMO of Salesforce, Sarah Franklin leads a powerful marketing and product management team that defines relevant and differentiated brand across industries. An engineer at heart, and I'll say a proud Virginia Tech grad, go Hokies. She's also well known for her creative vision across the international marketplace. Please welcome Sarah. Thank you, Sarah. In introducing my next guest, I'll note the obvious. It is extremely difficult to make Team USA, be it for a winter or a summer games. It's quite unfathomable to actually do it for both. So when we think about my next guest, a para-triathlete by summer and a Nordic skier by winter, Kendall Gretsch has made the US Paralympic team 3 times, winning 4 gold medals. In 2022, she became the first American woman, that's Olympian or Paralympian, to win gold in the biathlon. I'm honored to welcome Kendall to the stage to share her perspective and experience in using tech across countless aspects of her performance and equipment, be it on land, in the water, or up on a mountain, competing against the world's most elite athletes. Kendall, and someone who undoubtedly is well known in this room. Completing our panel is the most accomplished Team USA Winter Olympian of all time, an 8-time Olympic medalist across 3 games. He's also a New York Times best-selling author. His latest book, Hard Pivot, came out last year. A successful entrepreneur, a committed social activist, a highly sought-after motivational speaker and corporate consultant. And in all his spare time, of course, he decides to just go do things like complete an Ironman in under 10 hours or win season 4 of Dancing with the Stars. I'm kind of regretting the donuts I ate at breakfast right now. Certainly a part of LA28's mission, Apolo has been instrumental in driving the athlete's perspective into our organization. It's always a thrill to be in his company, US Olympian Hall of Famer Apolo Ohno. All right, thanks everyone for joining us today. Sarah, I wanted to start out with a question that really is not about sport, but I had the chance to do a little bit of homework about your career, and I saw an interview where you had a very compelling and impressive perspective, and it was about the role of the modern-day CMO, and I think you called it the glue between the chief technology officer and the chief revenue officer, and you went on to say that it's so important to have that spark of creativity. As we kind of start this notion in leading Salesforce to do these incredible things like support the Olympic and Paralympic movement, can you talk to me about your role and why you share that perspective?
Yeah, sure. And this is a new format for me with this, I feel like I've just played a basketball game and I'm, on the stage here. Yes, I do believe that especially now more than ever, the role of marketing is very strategic, not just in the business world, but in the world in general. And when I talk about it being a glue, it's being able to share and understand multiple perspectives, whether it's the technology officer to the revenue officer or the product leader, or in the games, you're looking to connect fans and athletes and helping all the organizations work together. And that's what is so important now more than ever, is that we collaborate, and that I think that marketing is ability to have that conversation, bring everybody to the table, have shared understanding. And yeah, you mentioned also bring the creativity. I also like a little bit of dash of fun, because in this world we can't take ourselves too seriously, right? At the end of the day, we're people, and we need to come together and do great things as teams.
Excellent. Kendall, I wanted to kind of take you to a macro level as well and see if you could just give us a little bit of background or education about the Paralympic movement. I think maybe folks in this room might not understand Paralympic. It really is a blend of the Greek term para, which means alongside, and the word Olympic. And clearly now has risen, as I said earlier, to be one of the most impressive and largest sporting events in the world. But as well, it has a kind of distinct element from the Olympics, and it has classifications in sport. So at the higher level, can you talk to us about the Paralympics and then kind of get down to the lower level, what these classifications mean? Because I know it's specific to you and your pursuits.
Yeah, so I don't think there's any Paralympic super fans yet. So just a little bit background on how it all works. So yeah, the Paralympics take place after the Olympics. It's usually about 2 weeks after. And like Dave was saying, classification is key. So what that means is, as athletes, before we can start competing internationally, we have to go through classification. And that's just assessing what your disability is and how it impacts your ability to compete in your sport. And so you get classified into different categories, and that's what allows us to compete on a level playing field. So myself, I compete in the wheelchair classification for triathlon, and then as a Nordic skier, I'm in the sitting classification. And even within that classification, there's smaller subgroups. So someone that has a higher spinal cord injury than I would, so a full-time wheelchair user, they would get classified in a lower classification as I do. And that comes to play. It's different for every single sport, but for mine, especially, I think will become relevant in the conversation, but for triathlon, I start a time back. As someone that has a higher injury from me, I'll start 4 minutes behind them, and then throughout the race, I would have to make up that 4 minutes, and then at that point, it's whoever crosses the line first, they're the winner in the race. So it's a bit complicated to see, but yeah, it is what's so key in allowing us to play on level ground and kind of eliminate the impact that our disability would have on our ability to compete in a sport.
Sarah, I want to talk a little bit about the social and emotional undercurrents that make sports so powerful. And our chairperson, Casey Wasserman, often reminds us in staff meetings or otherwise that if all we do in the summer of '28 is deliver a great on the field of play sporting experience for the athletes of the world, we actually will have failed. There's so much more to be done and done through and with the Olympic and Paralympic movement. But it's clearly a very complex endeavor, and we could not do it in any shape or form without the power of Salesforce and our other partners. But from your perspective, when you look at this opportunity, certainly sport is not new to Salesforce, but perhaps something of this magnitude might be. What was it that attracted Salesforce to the Olympic and Paralympic opportunity?
So, I mean, you articulated it well that this is a great opportunity to do more than just have the event happen on the field or in the pool or on the mountain or on the rink. And you want to bring the fans into the experience. And what we really see, especially with LA28 as a founding sponsor there, is we have an ability to really bring the fan engagement together, to connect them with the athletes, to tell the stories of not just what's happening right there in the moment, but what happened preparing, and then helping understand from a data perspective what's really going on, to really connect and understand all of the micro moments that you look at when you're competing that can help you achieve greatness out there. And so it's a powerful thing when we can be there to be a platform to help bring fans in, to drive engagement, and to see how technology can help really power the games.
So speaking of that technology, Apolo, earlier this morning we were kind of reminiscing or perhaps joking about back in the day, we've known each other for a while, that the work that Salesforce is doing to empower Team USA athletes back in kind of your prime days might have almost been near science fiction, right? So tell us about that moment and then the evolution as you sort of saw tech come into play. I think you were right at that kind of intro part of where it became such an essential part of competing at that level. But still, it was relatively new compared to what we're talking about today with our athletes. So give us some perspective on the history of that.
Absolutely. I think the access to the data in its, the way that athletes are using the data today to make micro changes in real time to their training, their recovery, their equipment, their hardware, and having a dashboard where you can see the smallest incremental changes that seem like somewhat insignificant on this particular day, but done weekly for years, results in tenths or even hundredths or larger, even seconds shaved off of a time. Versus a time where, I think when we were skating, I was joking with you, I said, I think I probably was overtrained, which means like I was training too hard with not enough recovery for like 80% of my career, because we just didn't know. Like we just, every day a coach asks you, how do you feel? I feel okay. And you go about your day without really kind of knowing and measuring what these things look like. And so the advancement has not only like leveled the playing field globally, but I think the athletes who are able to trust the data in a way that shows, because sports is always, this deep-rooted history in doing a particular movement that is usually backed by a coach or an expert who has their personal experience saying, this is how I did it, therefore you should also suffer in a similar way. Like I used to walk uphill both ways, like that type of thing, right? And the reality is, I think there's a small, thin lining that is truth around the resiliency and the grit and all those elements that we love sport to be. But there's also this new aspect that says there's a whole new blue ocean in terms of performance that can be harnessed if we understand that maybe if you are a sprinter, you shouldn't be going to do like long distance running, right? There's not really a lot of benefit there. So that's just at the very basic level. And then there's contextual layers associated with how these athletes are using their data, and then learning how to trust the data, because there's still this mental, I would say, resistance that says like, hey, like I just need more mental toughness, or I need to just train harder, when in reality sometimes letting off of the gas is also just allowing yourself to take the brick off the brake at the same time. And you realize that the engine was fine, but you were slamming down on both. And without those markers, we would never know that. So And there's hundreds of different, biomarkers that people are reading today, whether it's their sleep, whether it's nutrition, whether it's their lactic capacity and power. There's like so many different energy systems that athletes can train. And because the Olympic Games is the pinnacle of athletic achievement, that's where the testing ground is for the absolute component of human performance. Whether you are a Paralympic athlete, whether you are competing in short track speed skating like I did. And so the adoption of data, the adoption of technology, both in software and hardware, is game changer. And I was talking to the head coach of US speed skating for the short track team yesterday, actually. They had just returned back from the World Championships. And we were talking about what was the greatest change in the sport that I competed in over the past 23 years. So, 23 years ago, that was my technical peak of when I felt my best on the ice. And while the biomechanics of the sport have not changed at all, because that's just the nature of physics, all the other technologies that exist today, athletes are skating so much faster to the point where most of the women's team is skating much faster than I skated during my own training season. And so these rapid advancements just create these more extreme angles, and then the athletes are learning how to train more optimally in the same way. And so it's not just that, there's so many cool things that are happening on the mental health side of learning how to balance, these natural like norepinephrine and different cortisol levels that are being produced through the human body when you undergo massive amounts of stress. How do we counteract that with nutrition, with rest, with recovery, with balance of time away from sport? And how does that correlate to our day-to-day lives? And the way that trickles down into what we do today is pretty amazing, right? Because most people are under like heavy load of work, and most people are heavily stressed. And so we can use these new kind of top tier pinnacle of achievement. And as that trickles down to everyone in the US, how do we use this data to our advantage so we can just live better in a more healthy way?
So Sarah, Apolo just said it. He said there's so much going on, right? So you're an athlete and you're trying to train at the highest level in front of the world and perform. But since day one, Salesforce has been with us. You've been at the training centers, you've been at the games, you've been out at the competitions. Can you talk to us about some of the specific products and programs that you guys have put in place to help the athletes not only understand this, but actually put it in play as they look to compete? So I think of Tableau visualization, I think of even off the field of play, the trailhead reskilling programs, things like that. Tell us about some of these programs that really, since the earliest days of our engagement, you guys have started to build for us that are delivering what Apolo's talking about.
Yeah, you mentioned two great things. One is the visualizations, so using our products. We've worked with the national governing bodies and to create different visualizations. You can see based on various sports, the data in real time and see it. And so you can see and understand the data and make a lot of these changes that you may make as an athlete or as a coach. And then something which I'm really, really proud of is, and I have a personal passion for, is what happens beyond. So, I'm in awe of the training and the work and the just everything that goes in to the moment that you have to compete in the games. But we were even chatting before, it might be time boxed in terms of your ability to compete as an athlete at that level. And so what's next for athletes after the games? And so we have created a program that helps athletes reskill using our free online learning platform called Trailhead, which helps people get careers into a tech field if they're interested and learn tech skills, which they can get, great jobs, post Olympic Games or post being an athlete. And to me, that's where it really is an enduring relationship, because we're not just going to show up for the moment of the fame and the glory. We want to be there for the whole lifetime, and whether it's helping to train and helping have the data, but then also helping prepare for what's next after the games.
So Kendall, this is your everyday now, right? You are not only training, but you're focused intently on data and we were talking earlier this morning, optimizing your performance. And I was blown away that in Tokyo you had a race that lasted more than an hour. You won gold, way to go, but you won by 1 second. Tell us about the journey and the quest to better understand data, to better understand technology as it relates to your equipment. And you had a lot of interesting insights about like where you thought you made up that 1 second or how you thought about it. Can you share that with the audience?
Yeah, so like I explained earlier, so I'm starting my race 4 minutes back, and my top competitor would be starting in front of me. So she would start first, and I knew I had to make up, it was 4 minutes and 4 seconds, so really exact that time. And yeah, I understood that I needed to make some changes if that was going to happen. And so I was able to get a grant from the USOPC and get all new equipment. So I got a new hand cycle, that's what I used for the bike portion of my race, and a new racing wheelchair, that's what I used for the run. And that advancement in equipment, it was twofold. So the first one, we were able to do testing on that equipment and see that I'm able to work more efficiently in that equipment. So that has an impact on training of I can train harder, I can train longer, because I'm just not using as much energy to move my body in that equipment. But it also, it had allowed me to use more technology. So the bike that I was using was equipped with a power meter, which as a cyclist, that's critical. Like I use power so much to shape my training and what I'm doing. And like Apolo was saying, without data, you're going off of feel a lot. So how do I feel today? This feels like an 8 out of 10 for me. This is the effort that I'm putting in. But with a power meter on your bike, you can actually measure the specific amount of work that you're doing. And that's standardized over all sorts of conditions, whether it's windy, whether you're on a hill, on a downhill, power is consistent. And the specificity that you can get in your training is so much more than just based off of feel. And that was so critical for me in being able to have really, really specialized training on my bike before the race. And yeah, I think it translates into all different aspects. You know, in the pool, I have swim times. On the run, I can look at track. And so data is so key. You have to have that information so you can build off of it.
Sarah, let's hop off the field of play for a second and talk about fans. You know, it's no secret that younger fans are consuming or engaging with the Olympic and Paralympic movement very differently than older fans have. And so that's a big quest for us to make sure that they stay invested, they stay engaged, they stay energized. What are some of the ways that Salesforce is thinking about that, you know, dare I say, problem or perhaps opportunity for us? Not just understanding, you know, who and where they are, but really why they care and how they want to engage with us.
It's a great question, and yes, there's different types of fans. I like to think that I'm maybe a younger fan, but but my daughters often remind me that I'm not because I can't even speak the language that they speak often. And so yes, it's changed. The way people engage has changed. All of the channels have changed, whether it's in your living room, on your phone, on your computer, or just ambient ways of consuming of information. And so it's important that we meet people where they are and we participate in the conversations and how they're happening. I mean, last night we were joking about, you know, the time of mixtapes and VHS cassettes, and it's very different now with social media and how everything is, you know, the attention span is so much smaller and also so much more personalized. If you're a fan, you may want to really engage with like the story of the specific athlete that you're, you know, wanting to learn more about and see them compete. And so the more that we can get these, take all of the information that's created and create personalized moments that we share that people can engage with and they can get all of that information that's personalized to their interests is going to drive fan engagement, is going to drive interest in the games. And so whether you're old or young or in between, we want to be able to drive that personalized engagement and really, and again, it's to shine the light on the people that are doing the amazing things, which are the athletes.
Apolo, I know you have a deep perspective about this too. We were talking earlier this morning about the younger fan. I mean, what are your thoughts on how to keep them magnetically engaged in such a powerful property?
Yeah, I mean, the Olympic Games is an incredible property. It's been protected very well for the right reasons, and it's produced exceptionally well by the partners at NBC. I think the younger generation is, and we see this in real time with every generation that unfolds, but this one particularly has access to so many options in terms of who and what and the types of information that they are consuming on an ongoing basis, which Team USA's, one of the catalysts is how do we create these experiential moments for the country to experience or for the world to really embody that are fundamentally important to us as human beings on this planet, that have some kind of undertones of life lessons that are powerful for our kids to follow. But if the younger generation is not dialed in to the culture of the Olympics, we have to make sure that that line and open communication is there. And so I think that the way that the games have previously been distributed and perhaps streamed should be open for discussion and conversation because of all of the access to real-time technology of where people live. Like, people live on different social platforms. And so how do you bring in audiences, 20, 30, 40, 50, 100, 200, 300 million people around the world who typically do not watch the Olympic Games, become fans of the Olympic athletes, the stories, and everything that is embodied there. And I think it's feasible. And I think the way that you do that is you bring in these eyeballs, and effectively they create mini broadcasters by bringing their audiences to this incredible, unique, content-rich experience that is unlike anything on the planet. And it only happens every 4 years, right, for winter, and every 4 years for summer, and it's extraordinary. So I would love to see LA28 be that kind of beacon to show this is how we can do things slightly different while still respecting within the frameworks of protecting that incredible embodiment that the Olympic Games and the symbolism that it stands for, but also being real and authentic and showing like these stories are highly produced, but the reality is the road to Olympic or the road to glory is really rough, and it's filled with all types of pain and failure and triumph. And I think being transparent about showing all of those things in real time is creating a much more engaged line with people who feel like, wow, this is someone who actually is just like me, right? They may be doing something that makes them look extraordinary as a human being, but I grew up down the street from this person. They're from the same hometown. These are the things that we resonate with, and we feel like we get to know those athletes. And so that's a personal passion of mine, is getting the games to be in a place where it is everything that it always should be, but it's actually also the stuff that we experience every day at the Olympic Training Center. And it's the stories perhaps that are not told that are the ones that are most inspiring. And I can think of many that are far more inspiring and interesting than mine personally, and we've never yet seen them. So there's different backgrounds of people, there's different experiences, there's so many, it's just so rich with incredible storytelling that is relevant to anyone at any point in their life, whether you are going through struggle, whether you are facing hardship, whether you are in need of a hard pivot. How do we extrapolate some of that experience that only the games can do? And I think it is feasible, but it's going to take some shifting in terms of the way that we create mindsets around protecting such an asset in a way that maybe restricts the big ship from making moves that would normally deem to be risky. And it's hard, right? Anytime you run a very large organization, it's hard to make big, rapid movements because there's so many different elements that are dynamic in nature. And you don't want to focus on something that is a little bit outside of what you do best to try to get a smaller lift. I don't think I think you can do both in this case and scenario.
Kendall, Apollo highlights a really important juxtaposition. I mean, so many people see you guys at the games in these grand moments and winning medals, and everyone's kind of cheering you on, and it's quite glorious, and it means a lot to symbolism, around the world. But his point about the journey's tough, right? And there's a lot of stuff that goes on behind the scenes. I want to ask you, is there any concern about inequality or, quite frankly, an arms race, getting back to the point of technology? You've told us what it's like to show up at a competition and see different athletes with different equipment from different nations and sort of wondering, kind of why they have X or why they're using Z or whatnot. Can you tell us about that and give us some visualization of what's going through your head at that point?
Yeah, I think in the Paralympic space, the impact that equipment has is just amplified so much because you have the uniqueness of bodies is just to the extreme. And so the equipment that you use it's critical and it's vital, and it can be such a game changer. And there is a massive discrepancy in the equipment that you'll see from country to country. And if we were talking about, I was telling them about Nordic skiing and in that world, and yeah, the variety of equipment, you'll have teams where athletes are sitting on an aluminum frame with a piece of plywood, and they're just strapped in to plywood basically, and that's what they're competing on and at a high level, and they're doing really well with that equipment. And then you have other athletes that have equipment that's designed by an F1 team, and so the discrepancy that you get is massive. And it's really important that as athletes and as Team USA athletes, we have access to this amazing equipment and amazing advancements in technology, because it has the potential to make such a difference on our playing field. If we have the top equipment, we're able to compete at the highest level. And yeah, I mean, I think it's just, it's incredible.
Apolo, especially for a lot of people in the room or folks like myself that clearly, don't have the experiences that you do on the field of play, but still are concerned about health and wellness. I mean, we have an explosion of technology in the personal health and wellness space. We were talking about some of the products earlier this morning. Tell us a little bit about recovery. We've already this morning talked a lot about the field of play and training and whatnot, but it is extremely important to recover well and recover properly. And as people think about all of this technology coming into play, either for elite athletes or just in their everyday life, where do you see this world going?
I think perhaps one of the greatest advancements across all of the sports has been the approach psychologically to the word recovery. In a previous, era and generation where it was just train harder, train more volume. And there's times for that, of course. Like, we know that you have to train hard and there needs to be high volume, but it needs to be followed by some kind of metric that you're getting back, that your body's actually responding, right? It's just like if you're taking something for, like lowering blood cholesterol or something, and then you get another blood test and you're not responding, you'll make adjustments. Well, in the previous generation, there was just no adjustments. You just keep grinding harder and harder. And so the recovery component has been such a big part that we do, I see the athletes today, they adjust their training in real time. Your week of aggregated data showing your sleep performance has been poor. We know that we probably shouldn't put you in a highly ballistic, explosive training workout because the risk of injury skyrockets, right? We know that if you are responding really well and all of your blood levels and the way that you feel, the way you act, the way that you are reading in terms of your data, your heart rate is staying at a lower state, we can push the envelope a little more. And so the modalities of using technology like blood flow restriction, using things like, ice bath recovery and saunas, these have been like kind of staples in the industry for a very long time. And there's a whole slew of new types of technologies that our athletes are toying and tinkering with that are remarkable. And I would say that even in the last, 4 years of my career for my last Olympic Games, when I was at what I would call like the older end, the major difference in my career was not that I actually was that much stronger, it was in our just approach towards the sport. And we see that today with traditional American stick and ball sports, right? Athletes are pouring in millions of their own salary dollars to extend their careers by focusing on the recovery aspect. So fortifying the body is also fortifying the mind, right? What we always often forget about that is over long durations of time of training and stress, the mind becomes fatigued. So if you're doing a box jump as an explosive athlete, if you are already fatigued, your neural connections are not firing in the same type of synaptic way that we would normally want you to be firing, which increases the chance of having an injury, which would then set you back 6 weeks to a year, depending on how bad that injury is. And when you're talking about winning a race that's an hour long, only by a second, that people have trained 4 years or 8 years of their life, I mean, that's a massive difference. So, I mean, they're tracking sleep, they're tracking nutrition, they're tracking, obviously body composition, so your body fat, They're tracking all the different kind of biomarkers in terms of your blood chemistry. They're tracking lactic acid levels. And then now there's real-time tracking. For example, in the weight room, and I was telling you this story earlier, in the weight room at the US speed skating in Kearns, Utah, in Salt Lake City, they have these accelerometers on the squat bars and the power clean bars, measuring on both sides, that show the velocity of thrust from having the position from here to here or doing a back squat. So it shows in real time, hey, we think this athlete's performing very well, but if we look at this data, there's something here that's quite off. So we need to pay attention. Like, for example, if you had asked me how I felt every day and you structure a training program about that, I would just train hard every single day because I'm never going to say that I'm tired. But that's not actually beneficial. So, and this like bleeds into like everyday work, right? Like we need to like let off the gas sometimes to allow ourselves to actually regenerate, recover, and we come back so much more refreshed and engaged and actually more willing to tackle on new challenges and with, I think, the propensity to say like, I can versus I don't know if I'm going to make it through this. So it's always a delicate balance of like retaining the old school, like Rocky, I'm tough psychology, but then also using data to lean on to say like, I can still be really mentally tough and strong, but I can also be really smart about how I use that. Because you don't want to be torching your candle as an athlete or your life the same way, right? The thing burns very slow and you want to make sure it does so in the proper way.
I was
yeah,
just going
jump in,
to build off of that. I think when people ask me what it's like to be a full-time athlete and what do I do all day? I think that's like everyone's question of like, what are you doing for your time of day where you're, it's the full-time job. And most of the time, I'm not working out for 8 hours. The majority of my time is activities that are related to recovery. So whether that's like actively choosing to sit down, I'm getting massage, I'm eating the nutrition that I have, like the timing of that nutrition, it's all to aid recovery. And we're optimizing human performance, and you have to, like the detail and the level that you have to get into when you're talking about, recovery, that's where you really get the difference in your gains as an athlete at the top level. I think we often say like work smarter, not harder, and that it just feeds into that mindset of going harder, training harder is rarely the right answer in a lot of situations. You have to be smart on how you're training and how you're recovering.
Sarah, it's not just about LA28. As I mentioned before, Salesforce is involved with global sport all over the world, and one of those certainly is being a very proud supporter of Paris 24, hopefully Kendall's next games that we'll get to see her compete in. You have a significant business presence in that country and all throughout Europe. What is it about Paris 24 that you're looking forward to?
So I'm just really looking forward to being there and having a games again where we are actively there in person, where there's hospitality and spectatorship, and I'm like really looking forward to that. I feel that we haven't really had that in a while, and Paris is an incredible place to experience it. I love Paris. It's one of my favorite cities. We're going to see you win some gold. That'll be like the highlight. And so, I'm just really excited for that, and I'm excited for it to be just another step again in our partnership on the road to 2028 in LA, and experimentation that we can do to try new things, learn new things. And, I'm just really looking forward to that.
Yeah, it'll certainly be. I think a lot of us refer to it as the great global exhale, coming out of 2 different COVID games and whatnot. Hopefully we'll be back together. But Kendall, as you think about it, what's the difference in training when we think about technology and optimization and whatnot for summer versus winter? One thing that you brought up that I found fascinating is that when you're out training for Nordic skiing, unlike Apolo, you have no idea what the environment's going to be like that day. Apolo goes into an arena, it's fixed, basically knows it's not going to be blowing sideways wind or snowing or raining. He's inside on a sheet of ice. But for you, it's not just the variable of winter, but it's also having to maintain a life that focuses as a winter athlete and then pivots at some point, some days, somewhere, to being a summer athlete. So as you think about Paris, you think about the difference between winter and summer, when does that switch flip, and what's that journey like?
Yeah, so I guess a couple of things on that. I think there's this perception we were talking about people always ask, like, when do you start training for the games? And it's like it would happen, you know, a year before or something like that. And this is like a full endeavor constantly, all the time. And so I'm switching between summer and winter every single year. It's not just something that I do every 2 years between the two. And yeah, so you learn really well. You have, you know, at this point, I've been doing both sports for 6 years. You have 6 years of experience of switching between the two and how your body reacts. And that time in between is really key of like, I'm so strong. And again, this is where data and technology would be so helpful for me. And I can only imagine how beneficial it would be of I come in, I just finished my winter season last week. I'm about to switch to summer next week. I'm really fit right now, like cardiovascularly, very, very fit. I was just peaking for my season. But from a sport-specific side of things, I'm not there as in triathlon. And so if I go into triathlon and I go based off of, you know, what my heart rate is or things like that, I'm gonna blow myself out and I'm gonna set myself back weeks. I'm gonna be sore. And so yeah, having that data to be able to train smartly and like really tailor the training so that your body can adjust into the next season, I think is critical. And right now it's based off of feel. I have to like temper myself in my workouts of like, feel like I should be able to go hard, but I can't. Like, I can't rely off of my normal body signals in this transition period. And I think another thing about how data comes into play, the difference between summer and winter. Summer, I have lots of data available to me, so swim times, run times, power. Skiing is completely different. Snow conditions vary massively. Just the difference between the humidity in the snow, the temperature in the snow, all these different factors, and so time becomes irrelevant. And so you don't have these objective measures. We don't have them yet of how I can tell, am I progressing within a season? Am I progressing from year to year? Getting that information is really difficult right now. And so it's more of an art form now than a science. And I think as an athlete, that's a really uncomfortable space to work in. You want to have that information and you want to have that data of like, am I actually progressing? And those unknowns are scary.
Apolo, when you made the transition off the field of play, you stepped off the ice, you certainly have built a brand and you've been very successful. It reminds me, there's a class up at Columbia University's graduate program in New York that is entitled Olympians and Paralympians as Brands. And it really focuses on how athletes like yourself have been using tech to build your own brand or to drive your own career aspirations. So away from being an elite athlete, give us your perspective as an entrepreneur, as an author, as a consultant on how tech is helping you shape your future.
Yeah, I mean, I think the big elephant in the room for almost all of the athletes, and you know, Sarah, you had talked about this previously, is this like this transition stage from your identity as an Olympic athlete into what you want and what you do next. And you know, I call it the great divorce, right? Because your first true love, the thing that has nurtured you, that's given you the guardrails, told you that you were amazing and that you have purpose in your life. And this is even by choice, if you walk away from sport and try to do something else, you know, and then you try to come back to sport, the sport says, hey, like no matter what, I found someone younger, better, more attractive, you know? It's like the worst dream ever, right? A lot of trauma from that experience. So, but like in all seriousness, like, you know, so the great divorce happens and then the athlete, if, you know, and I'm only talking my personal experience, I was not prepared to retire. I thought that I was prepared to retire. I thought that I was ready for the next thing. I had no idea what that actually even meant. Although everyone around me was like, what do you want to do 3 years out from me actually going retiring? Are you ready to go do and find out what's next? I didn't feel it. So using, I think, the experiences that I had and the relationships that I had, I just delved into anything that my curiosity allowed. But really the thing, when you're talking about using data, so for example, when I joined a investment group, a venture group based out of San Francisco, their thesis is using data and data science to help engineer N of 1 companies, meaning we want to find organizations and companies that have such a asymmetric edge in terms of how they operate as a business or the product offering that they have, and they have a product market fit that has been proven, and we believe that investing in that company will scale exponentially. That's the entire model. So all of my team that I worked with was all data scientists and all data engineers, none of which I have any skill set in any capacity. So we have like unique programming team members who are like highly skilled quants, basically doing incredibly complex data modeling and financial modeling on what could happen if this goes right. So the reason why I give that story is because that was my insight into the power of data, not only in terms of the investment realm, but also could that same psychology be used in terms of how I approach like my own life, right? So if I have, like only, let's call it, if you only have 4,000 weeks in your life, so to speak, and then every week that goes by, you're kind of, marking off on this board, we have a very limited and finite amount of time. So the usage of time becomes critically important, and I think the mindful way to approach how you utilize that time also becomes important. So the input is X, and then how do you get an incredible output at the same time? And so using my experiences in the venture space, understanding how so many companies rely upon data to power their businesses in real time, seeing how athletes are now using that, I think it becomes very clear in terms of not only how I show up as the best version of me, whether it's my own personal biomarker tracking and sleep and all these other things that I'm just obsessed with, but also trying to figure out like what is the best route to feel like I'm living a fulfilled life, right? And what are those things? Because that's like the age-old question. So this is not really like a data question, but something that I think, and I hope that all Olympic athletes, I'd like them to start asking themselves is like when you reach, let's say if you're lucky enough to reach the age of 80 and you can talk to yourself at the age of 40 or 30, what would you say, right? What were the fears that you were feeling right now? What would you say to yourself back then? What are some of the insecurities or self-doubts or fears of failure perhaps that are paralyzing your ability to create action in your movement? And I think that to me just comes from failure, and it comes from talking to people that are old, right? In reality, because they've got so many incredible life lessons. So, it doesn't really correlate to the data question as much, but I think about that often because the numbers that we use on a day-to-day basis we all have the same amount of time, and I think that we often spend them doing things that maybe aren't really that important to us. So.
Indeed, very important points. And as noted before, we've got about 10 minutes or so left, so if you have questions, I think the process is just to hop up here and get in line for the microphone. So I'll ask a few, and if people have questions, please feel free to come up. But Sarah, I wanted to kind of go back to something we were talking about earlier in prep for this session, in that clearly you're one of the most widely respected tech marketers in the world, and people in the audience might look at the athletes and look at you and think you've had very different journeys, but there was a great sense of commonality on one thing this morning that we talked about, and that is a little bit what Apolo was saying about rejection or about failure or no. And I go back and I did my homework. There was a tweet that you put out in 2019 that talked about that very situation. And I'd like you to share that personal story, and then Kendall, I might ask you to jump in about your perspective as well. But why don't we start off with you, Sarah?
Yeah, so this is a true story about myself, and who here has ever been told no? If your hand's not up, you're not listening, you're on your phone, so you'd better. It's something we've all been told in our lives. We've been told no. And the story you're referring to was when I was coming out of college, I was engineering major, chemical engineering, had a lot of aspirations, but I didn't have the experience, and I applied to at the time when you wrote on paper into an application and mailed it into places, and they wrote you back letters, which somehow weirdly I kept all of these rejection letters, which I got rejection letter after rejection letter after rejection letter, and I was told no, and I can read it now 25 years later where it says, "You do not meet our criteria." And that's pretty deflating. And I rewind back now, I'm 48 now, so I look back and I'm like, wow, how did I, as like a young 20-year-old, have the courage to just say, well, you say no, but watch me, because I'm gonna do it. And no became my biggest motivator. And I don't know why I saved these letters, but I did, and I shared them on Twitter, and it went a little viral. It was interesting. because it's a shared experience that we all have. We have a dream, and somebody says, nope, you're not good enough, you're not smart enough, you don't match the criteria. And that's what, no matter what it is that we want to do, I believe that if you decide you're going to do it, if you give your best energy and you try your best, you can accomplish it. And if you tell people you want to achieve it, they will support you and they will help you. And so that's why I think that it's important for us to understand what are our fears. You know, my core values are authenticity, courage, and well-being. And every day I wake up and I ask myself, what am I afraid of? And I want to tackle that fear just head on. And that's what we all need to do in life, whether you're an athlete, whether you're in business, whether you're scared of speaking, whether you're scared of doing, whether you're scared of trying, whether you're scared of failing. Whatever the fear is, we all have to just face it together.
So Kendall, being told no or being told you can't, you are obviously a highly elite athlete. The pressures are huge, but tell us about your personal reaction to that sentiment.
Yeah, we were talking about this earlier, and I said that I really relate to that story of being told no. So as an adaptive athlete, as a para-athlete, society is basically just telling you no in a lot of different spaces. And a lot of us, you know, when you constantly are hearing that, whether it's like actual verbal words or going to take a moment like this space that we're in right now, we're up on a stage. So if I was in a wheelchair, like this stage is telling me no, that I'm not, like I don't belong in this space. And it's those constant everyday reminders that you have, that you build this kind of like fire within yourself to motivate yourself to prove that, you know, that no is wrong, that's incorrect. And I think that's one of the things that I am really excited about for LA28. The Paralympic movement is also a social movement. It's about showing people what people with disabilities are capable of, that we belong in these spaces. It's not just about sports and the sports world. It's about employment opportunities, accessibility, just in the world in general, and shining a light on that. And I think LA28 is going to be an amazing platform to raise awareness for that movement in America. And the ripple effect beyond sport, I think, is going to be massive.
Indeed. Thank you for sharing that. All right, we'll go to some questions. Sir?
Hi, good morning. Thank you very much. Very interesting. Kendall, I work in Paralympic sport in the UK, and it's great. First of all, it's great to see you up on a panel like this. I think it's really important that the word's getting out, and it's great to hear you. Obviously, the Paralympic and Olympic movements in the UK have recentered within Colorado. You spoke about tech and innovation and how that has helped you with your training and how that's helped develop your skills. How much of a priority do you feel that you are granted as a Paralympian within the Olympic Paralympic shared space? Because it's something we're wrestling with a lot in the UK.
Yeah, you know, I am constantly very, very grateful that I am a part of Team USA, because I think the amount that para-athletes are elevated within the US is massive compared to other countries, and I feel that benefit every single day. And it's really clear when you go to a competition that has a massive impact. But it's not perfect. It's definitely, there's room for growth, and it's, you know, it's little things of like budget allocation, of understanding that, yeah, the investment that you have to make is different in para-athletes. Like from, you know, the equipment aspect of things, or like a lot of people that are using prosthetics, like that, the investment that you have to make in those spaces are just different. And I think, you know, you constantly have to bring that up of here are what my needs are. Like the technology isn't in the same space as it might be on the Olympic side of things. But yeah, I feel grateful to be a part of Team USA.
Okay. Sir?
Hi, thank you guys for being here. I'm actually working on an athlete sports technology startup myself. And at the beginning, the mission was optimize human performance, and we had really smart data scientists on the team. But it's really transitioned to being more about achievement and enjoyment, more general about the feeling of being on a team and a sport. So I wanted to ask you guys, where does optimization go too far, and how do you think about the psychology of everything being quantified and measured?
I think it's America's obsession with winning.
Yeah.
That it's hard to override that, right? We celebrate champions in the culture of everywhere. So if you portray someone to be something we celebrate, this is naturally what you gravitate towards. There's always and then the secondary question is like, at what cost?
Yeah.
Right? So like I was, an insane training partner to be with, but at what cost? There was always a cost. And so most athletes, didn't know this on my team because I was pretty quiet and stoic in terms of how I felt about myself, but there was a lot of like mental imprisonment that existed when I was training.
Yeah.
Because I was just deeply, I'm battling this own psychological, demons that I have around not being good enough, never being good enough, I'm less than. And these are like amazing, by the way, these are amazing motivating factors for performance if you're able to leverage them to your advantage. Like being told no,
Yeah.
right? Very similar like a Michael Jordan scenario. Using that to your advantage is very powerful. But if it imprisons you, it's really, really damaging. So the beautiful part about being a part of a team is that you can now share not only that responsibility, but you have this unifying experience that's to me the Olympic Games. So to give you an example, one quick story. My first Olympic Games was 2002 Salt Lake City, 6.5 months post 9/11 when the country was in like chaos. It was like very uncertain, very familiar environment to today, like although slightly different, but a lot of the same like rhetoric and words were being used, right? Unsafe, unsure, uncertain, etc. And I had thought the entire time that this was about me and this was about my chance at winning gold. And when we went to the opening ceremonies and I saw this like very powerful moment of the flag being flown that was tattered and it was ripped and there was holes in it, I realized that this was much more about we. And so I was only 19 years old at the time, but that was the turning point for me to realize that there is an entire embodiment that even though I wasn't connected to any of these strangers who were in this opening ceremonies or the millions watching around the world, we had some kind of cerebral connection that we all shared. And that's a really powerful component. So as we dive deeper and deeper into, we know we demand extreme performance, at what cost, right? And so I think that's where the wellness aspect is such a critical role, not only in athletes, but in any performer, in any career path, in any capacity. You know what it feels like when you're in flow and you're feeling good and you feel like you can't lose. Yep. That's an amazing state. It's hard to replicate, but the only way you do that is by having times, I believe, of like reflection, introspection, team environments, and allowing yourself to rest and recover. And there is something about sharing wins, and there's also something about sharing losses that's
Definitely.
Deeply powerful. That individual sports is challenging, but that's why you have your coaches and your family and your friends, because people are bought into that psychology. So congrats on the venture, and I think that it's something that's talked about a lot, right? In a previously cutthroat environment where everyone demands winning at all cost, I think that is not relevant in every industry. I think maybe few exist in that way, and I think that people demand extreme performance, but there's also a conversation around at what cost. And so if it costs that your employees are like incredibly unhappy, then there's not going to be loyalty, and the culture is going to depreciate over time. So how do you create something that's sustainable? How do you create something that has loyalty and brand value and resiliency, no matter what the market conditions are? That to me is all about finding that balance, and the team is a huge part of that.
Yep.
People talk about the connection that we didn't have in 2 years during COVID. That can be your workspace. It's beautiful.
Yep.
Excellent. Well, thanks for the question.
Thanks.
I know we're running out of time, but I want to see if we can get to these last two. And then I'll note that our panelists very kindly are going over to the San Jacinto room afterwards. So if we can't get to other questions that you may have, we'll be over there for a few minutes. But sir, please go ahead.
I try to keep mine short and sweet. First of all, thank you guys for being here. Salute you all for your successes thus far. My name is TJ Simmons. I am a former Olympic volunteer. I volunteered in the Rio Olympics, so I'm just obviously in love with the games, but when I got there, I was even more so in love with like the spirit of the games. Since those games, I've developed a product that I think would spark engagement within the fans. My question is for you, Dave. Are there any opportunities for small companies that aren't, say, a Nike or an Adidas to partner with the games? I would love to.
Absolutely, and let's talk offline afterwards. But I'll say very quickly. I mean, right now, I sort of mentioned a couple of stats about the scale. Our scale is where we have to go, I should say, is massive. We're at LA28 as an organizing committee, so different from Team USA. We're roughly about, I don't know, say 200 or so employees. We have to scale to about 6,000 to 7,000 paid employees by the time we get to the summer of 28, but then you add in all of the volunteers and the other type of workforce that we'll need, and you're looking at about 80,000 people working in an organization. So there's tremendous opportunity, and with that, we want to make sure that we provide opportunities at all levels. So certainly in the city of Los Angeles and in and around Southern California, but elsewhere as well, we will be standing up definitive business programs and cooperative opportunities. Our partners like Salesforce and others will help us consider the best way to bring along small business and not just kind of do, but also teach in that process. So let's connect afterwards, and we'll go from there.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Yep. One more question?
Hi, again, thank you all for being here. It was a great session. My question is talking about the link between psychological and physiological that we touched on, or that you guys touched on. Is there any impact on these different training innovations and equipment on athletes' mental health, and then how might that impact accessibility to athletics for people with mental health conditions and diagnoses?
Kendall, maybe you want to...
Yeah, I think, the first thing that comes to mind is, we're talking so much about data and how powerful data is, but it can create this mental barrier sometimes of performance where, if you're so used to seeing the numbers that you can put out in training and maybe you get to a race, and if you get so stuck on that number of like, oh no, I'm not hitting the number, or like this is way higher of a number, I shouldn't be able to sustain this, and you can get locked in onto the data so much where there does have to be a balance between, the art form of being an athlete and then the data that you can consume. And so I think just the mental health aspect of that, of, being able to break out of that, and yeah, kind of go back into and trust your instincts as an athlete, but like using the data to help you, but not being trapped by the data.
Excellent. Thank you.
Thank you.
I certainly wish we had more time. I'd love to keep going, but we've got to move on, and I certainly will note that we recognize how very busy you are. So on behalf of LA28, Team USA, Sportico, as well as South by, Apolo, Kendall, Sarah, thank you so much for joining us today. And as mentioned, we'll be next door, so I hope to see some of you over there. Thank you.